UK has accused President Putin of deliberately spreading false information about a British decision to send tank shells that contain depleted uranium to Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense said such material is standard for rounds that have the ability to pierce through armor and that they have nothing to do with nuclear weapons. That statement was issued after Mr. Putin condemned the plan to send such shells to Ukraine, talking about a nuclear component, and warned he would retaliate. Well, for on this, let's cross live to London and speak with Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, who joins us from our London studios. Good to see you, Karl. So the Russian president, first of all, accusing the West of deploying nuclear weapons in response to the UK providing Ukraine with shells made with depleted uranium. Mr. Putin has said Russia will be forced to react if this happens. The UK confirming it will provide those armor-piercing shells, insisting they have a low risk of radiation. Who is right and who do we believe?
Charles, a very good question, but just to put things in perspective, we're talking depleted uranium. That's a big, big difference from enriched uranium. When you have enriched uranium, you have a nuclear weapon, you have a nuclear bomb, okay? When you have depleted uranium, it's uranium that's not been enriched, and it's uranium that's basically a byproduct that can be still used as a component of a weapon, of a shell. And that's what we have here. In fact, even Russia has it and uses it. What's important about uranium is that even if it's depleted, it's very, very deadly. It's twice the strength or weight of even steel or lead, 1.7 times, if I'm not mistaken, or at least twice mistaken. The point being that it is an armor-piercing component of an artillery shell. The UK has said that they will send about a dozen of its Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. And those tanks will contain artillery shells that can pierce Russian armory. That's what it's all about, Charles. We're not talking about nuclear weapons. And the thing about it, again, Charles, is this. That was first on display in the initial Gulf War back in 1990. When we saw the assault against Saddam Hussein in 1990, and then it was seen again in 2003. So this is nothing new. It's not unusual. Yes, it's an important component, but it's not a nuclear weapon. And that's why you have, Moscow, using this kind of inflammatory language.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Karl. But of course, it's not just Mr. Putin saying for propaganda purposes that the West is supplying Ukraine with nuclear weapons. It's his reaction saying that Russia will be forced to react. I mean, how do you read all that? Could he be setting the scene for some sort of escalation, briefly?
Charles, let's be honest about it. We've seen this kind of saber rattling since last summer with the threat of use of tactical nuclear weapons. And that's been, the threat going back to, again, as I said, last summer. And nothing has materialized. But this is not a nuclear weapon. And they know that the use of these, even the Russians themselves, they use these as their components with their tanks. It's armor-piercing metal. That's the problem. Even they themselves use it, but it's very rare and it's depleted. So that's what we're up against right there. We're not talking about an escalation. We're talking about tanks being sent to the Ukraine from the UK, about a dozen. They're having shells that have the ability to basically not only pierce through the armor but destroy Russian tanks.
Meanwhile, Karl, the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev warning the West against acting on that ICC arrest warrant issued against Vladimir Putin, saying it would amount to a declaration of war. How seriously should we take that warning?
Well, to be truthful, Charles, you know what? There's been so much vitriolic language the past year. You know that as well as I do. You know, what do you want to do? Do you want to measure up the rhetoric against the weaponry and the destruction, devastation? I mean, to be honest, Charles, I mean, if we could give a perfect example, you know, some people say that, Putin he's so isolated, he's a global pariah. You know, once Xi Jinping visited him, who's next? No leader is going to visit him. There are 133 members of the ICC that he cannot travel to unless he faces arrest. The next biggest global meeting, Charles, is in South Africa. That's the BRIC meeting in Brazil, Russia, India, China in August. The big question is, will he attend that, for example? And then there's a big, G7 meeting, of course, in May. So there's a big question about how far can Putin go? He's very isolated, and he's a real global pariah right now.
Well, I mean, to be entirely fair, the South Africans don't have a history of putting people up for arrest on ICC warrants. I mean, we had the former Sudanese president go there, Omar al-Bashir, when he had an arrest warrant, and the South Africans refused to arrest him. But we'll have to wait and see. Karl, thanks very much indeed. Karl Bostic, Arise special correspondent, talking to me there from our studios in London.